Today's lesson is Bloody Fingerprints. Rome was in terror by December 43 BC, the last month of Octavian's consulship. Roman citizens were fleeing for their lives. Soldiers with drawn sword in one hand, a list of names in the others, were searching streets and houses. The Senate was powerless to stop them. For now, the three dictators working together had seized control of the government. Those three dictatorships, known as triumvirate, had signed a proclamation calling for the wholesale murder of their enemies. One of the three was young Octavian. It would be a happier thing if we would skip this black page in the story of that young emperor-to-be and recall only his latter years, known as the Great Augustinian Age. But that would be to write propaganda and not history. For the sake of truth, the whole story of his rise to power must be told. Signing his name to this proclamation is part of the story. Another signature was that of Antony. The senators had celebrated their victory over him too soon, and as Caesarea feared, they had let the foul and deadly beast escape. That, like brushing off Octavian, was a mistake for which they were to suffer. It gave reason for those two former enemies to unite against their common enemy, the Senate. They were brought together by an older general named Lepidus, the third man in the triumvirate. Old Papa Lepidus, as Antony called him, had been a cavalry commander under Julius Caesar. He was a man of 60 years or more. It was to him, at his camp at the Forum Julii, that Antony had fled when he had made his escape, the night following the battle. Lepidus, after receiving Antony, had written to Octavian, suggested that he join forces with him. The letter had reached Octavian just at the right moment, just when he had made up his mind to break connection with the Senate. To join Antony and Lepidus had then appeared the best thing for him to do. The idea of forming a triumvirate also appealed to him. In that, too, he was following his great-uncle's footsteps, for Julius Caesar himself had once been part of a similar three-man dictatorship. That was the first, and this one, formed by Antony, Octavia, and Lepidus, was the second triumvirate. The first meeting of the Big Three took place in October in Cisalpine Gaul, on a very small island in the middle of a river. In preparation for the great event, a tent had been erected on the little island and two narrow bridges built, one leading from each bank. It was to be a very secret meeting. Each man was to go to the island alone, unguarded, and all their troops were to remain on shore. Accordingly, at the appointed hour, out from one bank could see the spindly legs of Octavian moving forward deliberately across one of the narrow bridges. And at the same time, striding forth from the opposite bank, came a big muscular fellow in a scarlet general's cap, which was caught and flung wide by a sudden breeze. Following him, knees and shoulders slightly bent, came an older man with gray, bushy hair. Thus, the three men, young, middle-aged, and old, approached the island. Each, as he stepped onto it, was alone and unarmed. That is, supposedly unarmed. Octavian and Antony, however, more suspicious than trustful, both took precaution to feel for hidden weapons before embracing too cordially. Convinced of the so-called friendship, the three men entered the tent, seated themselves about the table, and got down to business. First, they drew up an agreement. For 5 years to come, they would rule Rome and Italy together. Then they divided up Rome's provinces in the west. Of those in the east, Brutus and Cassius still had control. Not until they had been defeated would Rome's eastern possessions also be in the hands of the triumvirate. It was decided, therefore, that while Papa Lepidus remained in Rome, Antony assisted Octavia, should set out for Greece or Asia if need be to defeat Brutus and Cassius and those armies which they had now raised and equipped. At this point, two tormenting questions arose to perplex these three ambitious gentlemen. Where would they get money enough to pay for the campaign? What about the enemies they would leave behind in Rome? On the third day, they worked out the answer to those questions. On that day, the three men drew up a list of their enemies, which included many wealthy men whose property would be confiscated. And they plotted the worst blood purge and wholesale murder that Rome had ever known. Their proclamation preceded the list, began with the following false and self-righteous words. We, Marcus Lepidus, Marcus Antonius, and Octavius Caesar, having been elected to bring into harmony and order the affairs of the Republic, make the following proclamation. Seeing that the wickedness of those who have insulted us, who have plotted to destroy us, and by whom Caesar was slain, cannot be overcome by any kindness, we choose to anticipate our enemies rather than to suffer ourselves. Some of them have already been punished. The rest, with the gods' help, you shall shortly see chastised. One task yet remains, to make war of the murderers of Caesar, who are across the sea. And since it does not seem safe for either of us or for you to leave the rest of our enemies here behind, we must put them one and all out of the way. Therefore, with the blessing of heaven, we give command that none shall harbor any of those whose names are written here below. Whosoever shall bring the head of any one of them to us, if he be a free man, shall receive $500. But if he is a slave, he shall receive 200, his freedom and all the civic privileges of his master. The same reward shall be given anyone who shall furnish information of their place of hiding. Then, following a list of names, including approximately 2,000 knights and 300 senators. With the publication of the list, the awful manhunt began, and terror struck the city. Those named on the list, as well as many who were not named, been hunted out for private spite, were tracked down, slain in their beds, or murdered on their doorsteps. Every day, soldiers came marching back to the forum, carrying sacks full of heads to count and claims that coveted reward. One day, early in December, the right hand as well as the head of a man was brought to Mark Antony. On a large head, the gray hair, Slav, thin and rumpled. The middle finger of the hand was slightly stained with ink. The hand that had been written made consoling thoughts on the nature of the universe, on friendship, old age, and immortality that would be read and enjoyed for centuries to come. It was the hand of Caesarea. But that severed hand had also written the 14 orations against Antony, which he never would forget. Now, he cried with satisfaction, our list is complete. He ordered the head and the hand of the dead orator hung up on the rostrum, that all might see, he said, the penalty of double dealing. That was December 7th, 43 BC, the day of Caesareo's death. After he had lost hope of saving his beloved republic, Caesareo had returned to the country and his writing. On the day of his death, he had been riding in his litter, trying to escape when he heard the soldiers coming. Terrified till then, he suddenly became composed. He told the frightened loyal slaves to set the litter down. A moment later, the soldiers rushed up with drawn swords, found the old man sitting quietly, one elbow on his knee, his head resting heavily on his hand, as it was uttered wearily. Without a word, he bent his neck to receive the blow he knew no more. When the time comes, he had once said, I shall withdraw from life, not as one leaves home, but as from temporary lodging. On that brightest of all days, when I depart from the confusion of this world, I shall set out, I believe, for a far-off divine gathering of spirits. But if I am mistaken in that I believe men's souls to be immortal, I am glad to be mistaken, and all my life I shall continue to believe it.